This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So today we are going to discuss about zoonosis. So as we all know that the recent pandemic which we are going through, COVID, is also most likely a zoonosis. So we'll have the ice breaking today with that. So let us discuss about COVID and its zoonotic origins. Okay, so as we saw in the video, many diseases can have zoonotic origins, and zoonotic diseases are not only very common, at the same time they are also a favorite of many examiners. If it doesn't come as a theory question, it can come as a part of your viva, and you may be asked to list out the diseases in long questions, and then you may be asked about a particular zoonotic disease. So in this particular class today, we'll discuss about what are zoonotic diseases, and then we'll discuss about the important viral, parasitic, and bacterial diseases which have zoonotic origins. And I'll discuss most of the common points regarding these zoonotic diseases, but you have to go back to the chapters which have been already covered for you, and then you have to revise them. Okay. So just now we have discussed that many diseases can be zoonotic, and about 75% of all emerging diseases always have a zoonotic origin. So as we are going through this present pandemic, maybe bats, maybe pangolins, maybe some other animal is responsible, but we are sure of one thing, that it may have a zoonotic origin. Okay, so zoon is basically animal and zoon is a disease. So zoonotic diseases are diseases which originate from animals, and basically these are diseases and infections which are naturally transmitted from vertebrate animals to humans, as WHO gave in 1959 as the definition of zoonotic diseases. So most of them are diseases which are primarily those of animals, and man can be an accidental host. So that is what primarily can be a zoonotic infection. So any infectious disease that can be transmitted, it may be a vector which is responsible, but it has to be from animals, both wild and domestic animals to humans, or from humans to animals. That is a reverse zoonosis. A reverse zoonosis in which humans transmit it to animals. So xenozoonosis is transmitted by transplantation between species. So this is just a term you should know. So these are the different terms in connection with the zoonotic diseases. The classical or the traditional concept of zoonosis is that an animal with a disease, and this particular disease is transmitted by the transmission of the pathogen to man. For example, tuberculosis, which is having bovine origins, or brucellosis, which we have already discussed. But the modern or current concept is that there can be a clinically normal animal, and the transmission is there of a hazardous pathogen to man. So it can be Campylobacter or the verotoxigenic Escherichia coli. So we never know. So the animal may be clinically normal. They may not have a particular disease. They may not suffer from the disease, but they may be harboring that particular pathogen. Okay. So many pathogens have their zoonotic origin, as we discussed in the video. About 60% of all pathogens can be zoonotic, and about 75% of emerging diseases are zoonotic. And viral diseases are more common, and more than 99% of the viruses remain to be discovered, because many of them we may suffer and we may get well, but we may not know that we have had that particular disease. So you can see many different organisms are there which can have a zoonotic origin. There is a huge potential for future zoonotic emergence, especially because there has been a recent, not exactly recent, but in the recent past, there has been a change in how we have perceived our environment. There have been a lot of changes in the environment, huge en masse cutting down of trees, deforestation, and global warming. So many points can be there which can be responsible for zoonotic emergence. So emerging zoonotic diseases like swine flu, bird flu, Plasmodium knowlesi, malaria, SARS, the recent SARS-CoV-2, mad cow disease. So many may be the emerging zoonotic diseases, and hantavirus in the USA, avian influenza, bovine spongiform encephalitis, Nipah virus. So all of them are emerging, and all of them are zoonotic. So there are different etiological agents, like for example, bacterial zoonosis like anthrax, brucellosis, plague, leptospirosis, salmonellosis, Lyme disease, and viral zoonosis like rabies, arbovirus infections, Casanova forest disease, yellow fever, influenza, and rickettsial zoonosis like murine typhus, tick typhus, scrub typhus, Q fever, and protozoal zoonosis like toxoplasmosis, trypanosomiasis, leishmaniasis, helminthic zoonosis like echinococcosis. You already remember the disease transmitted from dogs, or hereditary disease, and teniasis, schistosomiasis, and dracunculiasis, and fungal zoonosis like deep mycosis like histoplasmosis, cryptococcosis, and superficial dermatophytes. And there can be ectoparasites also like scabies and myiasis. So how do human beings become infected? As we saw in the video, there can be a direct or an indirect route. For example, directly the person is exposed to the animal, so through direct contact, or through indirect contact like the different body fluids from the animals, or maybe through a vector. So who are most at risk? Naturally, those people who are coming more in contact, maybe direct or indirect contact with infected animals, like abattoir workers, poultry workers, farmers, veterinarians, and pet owners. And those factors which can promote is naturally frequent contact with animals, overlap with the wildlife habitat, like Bear Grylls is going into the forests and eating all sorts of things. So one of my favorites actually. So anyway, poor animal sanitation and poor personal hygiene and intensive livestock production. So all these factors may be responsible why zoonosis may be emerging. So, and naturally there is an etiology classification like viral, bacterial, parasitic, and mycotic zoonotic infections. And as you may be remembering, avian influenza, basically they are there in different birds. The birds from Siberia, other birds who can be there who stay in colder regions, and the virus is maintained in those lower temperatures, and they have a normal cycle with the waterfowl. So avian influenza has a normal influenza cycle, it's going on, but somehow it may be carried on to domestic birds in some cases, and in those cases it may lead to a pandemic disease cycle. And mammals like pigs can act as a mixing vessel, like in swine flu. We have discussed that what happens is the pig acts as the mixing vessel, and the human and the bird viruses, all of them can be mixed, because there are 8 pieces of RNA fragments of the influenza virus. So basically, the influenza virus can be reassorted and changed, and then it can come onto humans. So that is how there can be transmission from birds or from mammals and then to humans. So this is what happens in influenza. And then in rabies, as you already know, there can be reservoirs like canines or even cats, bats, raccoons. And the rabies virus, it is a rhabdovirus. It is transmitted through the saliva of the infected animals. And once the human is bitten, then he may have seizures, paralysis, and fever. And in very less cases, the human gets well, and they may also succumb to the disease. So it is an acute, highly fatal viral disease of the CNS caused by the rabies virus. And in India especially, the rabies accounts for many deaths, up to 20,000 deaths annually. And many bites in India are by dogs, out of which 60% are strays and 40% are pets. And rabies is present all throughout India except in the islands of Lakshadweep and Andaman and Nicobar. And there is an incubation period of about 3 to 8 weeks. And then there is Lassa fever, which is found predominantly in West Africa, particularly Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. And the rat is the reservoir, and through infected urine and feces, transmission can occur, and man-to-man transmission can also occur through infected body fluids. So this is a viral hemorrhagic fever. Lassa fever is actually a very highly fatal disease which occurs in certain places, and it can cause many deaths. And then there is West Nile fever in the reservoir of birds, and the West Nile virus is transmitted through mosquito bites from the bird, and then the mosquito picks up the virus and then transmits it to the human beings. So then this cycle may continue. So the humans have fever and flu-like symptoms in West Nile fever. Then there is bovine spongiform encephalopathy. I think you might be quite small when there was a huge outcry because of mad cow disease in England, in which what happened was the agent is a prion or a infectious proteinaceous agent. It doesn't exactly have DNA or RNA. It doesn't have a nucleic acid, and the infectious agent is basically a proteinaceous particle, and this is transmitted by eating infected beef. And basically, why is it known as spongiform? Because the brain, once you do an autopsy, you can find that there are sort of sponge-like things, and once you see the cell also, the cell which is infected, in there also you can see lots of vacuole-like things, and that is why it is known as spongiform encephalopathy. So neurological disorders that worsen over time, and basically supportive treatment, but these diseases usually they worsen over a longer period of time, but usually the patient dies. So usually it is. Then there can be parasitic zoonosis like toxoplasmosis, as you might remember. So it is a single cell parasite known as Toxoplasma gondii, and it is infected it is transmitted by touching infected cat feces or eating undercooked meat or contaminated water. And then there is flu-like symptoms, and medications, if needed, they are given. And from the mother to the baby, it can be transmitted, and the babies can have different types of disorders. So there can be eye and brain damage also. So you might remember about toxoplasmosis. Basically, it can undergo merogony, or it can also undergo, you can see the gametogony also, it can undergo. The male gamete and the female gamete give rise to the oocyst, and this occurs in the cat. And what happens is the cysts which contain bradyzoids, they can be there, and it can be there in the rats. And this cycle usually goes on between the cats and the rats and all. And the oocyst, once it is shedded, you can see that the cycle is going on. But somehow, if the human is infected, it can be through any other animal or through cat, and then different parts of the body can be damaged, like the brain, the eye. The developing fetus can be having some sort of congenital disorders, and then the heart also can be affected. So this is the thing with toxoplasmosis. So there can be bacterial zoonosis also, like plague. Plague is an important zoonotic disease of the past, and this is a deadly infectious disease that is caused by Yersinia pestis. It is an ancient disease and has caused 3 pandemics in the 6th century, and there have been fatal outbreaks in Maharashtra and Shimla, and the latter one was after the earthquake took place. And then it is transmitted by the black rat and the rat flea, that is Xenopsiala sciopes, and the transmission is by droplet contact or direct physical contact, by soil contamination, airborne transmission, or fecal transmission, vector-borne transmission carried by the rat flea. So it can occur. So you can see here there is the lesion. So there can be disseminated intravascular coagulation, meningitis, or multi-organ failure also. The symptoms begin after about 2 to 8 days. You may remember about the bubo, the tender lymph nodes that occur wherever the bite of the rat flea is there. So in the nearby draining lymph nodes, the buboes will occur, and because of these buboes and the blackening of the body, so after some time the body will also become black. So these were the things which have been the scourge of humans since quite some time. Then there is tuberculosis, that is by Mycobacterium bovis. The reservoir are cattle, and transmission can be through unpasteurized milk, raw meat, or droplets and aerosols. or even Mycobacterium avium, which is an atypical mycobacterium, and where the reservoirs are birds. And this is a very important risk for the immunocompromised people, like those people on HIV, on chemotherapy, transplant patients. So those people can have atypical mycobacteria like Mycobacterium avium. Then there is anthrax, which causes, as you remember, the malignant pustule, malignant edema, wool sorters disease, rag pickers disease, etc. And anthracosis for coal is this disease was named like that. It is caused by the spores of the Bacillus anthracis, and it is transmitted by that. It is primarily a disease of the domesticated and wild animals, such as herbivores such as sheep, cows, horses, and goats. And the soil, which is rich in organic matter, can also be more helpful in transmitting the disease. So these are aerobic organisms. These are gram-positive rods, as you see in this picture. So these spores are inhaled, ingested, or come into contact with a skin lesion on a host, and then they may reactivate and then multiply rapidly. So infected blood to broken skin, or by consuming diseased animals' flesh, there can be pulmonary, gastrointestinal, or even cutaneous anthrax. So there are different species of the Brucella organism, like Brucella abortus is from cattle, melitensis is from goat or sheep. As you remember, this is the type of picture that we see on gram stain. These are gram-positive bacilli, but the empty spaces here you can see, these are the spores which do not take up the gram stain, as you might remember. So they look exactly like bamboo sticks or something like that. So like that they look. So Brucella melitensis and Suis are more virulent, and these are small, non-motile, gram-positive organisms, and these are having an incubation period of about 5 to 60 days. And undulant fever is a characteristic. Undulant fever means the fever comes and goes. There will be spikes of fever, and again it will reduce. So it is an undulant or intermittent or irregular fever with a variable duration. So there is transmission to human beings by direct contact with infected tissues or ingestion of raw milk, inhalation of infectious aerosols, inoculation with animal vaccines, and they are shed in large numbers in the milk and all. So that is why the milk ring test, the other tests you might remember, the rose Bengal test. So those tests are done so that the milk which is delivered to us is free of these pathogens, and that is why all the milk packets that you take, those are all pasteurized and then they are distributed. So pasteurization eliminates the organism. And usually the dairies, they have a different battery of tests to ensure that they do not transmit the pathogen. So then there is psittacosis caused by Chlamydophila psittaci. You might remember there was a chapter chlamydia. At the end of the chlamydia chapter, there was another small organism which was given, that is Chlamydophila psittaci. So why it is known as psittaci? Because it is spread from psittacine birds like the parrot and other kinds of birds. It is an obligate intracellular bacterium. You might remember Rickettsia, Mycoplasma, and Chlamydia, Chlamydophila. These are all intracellular organisms. Even though they are bacteria, they are intracellular, obligate intracellular organisms, and they are transmitted from birds to humans. And you might remember there were the inclusion bodies, there were the elementary bodies, so in the organisms. And then there are routes of infection like the inhalation or mouth to beak contact or handling infected birds, plumage and tissues, and even brief exposures can lead to infection. So then there was Q fever. You might remember in the Rickettsia chapter, there was Q fever caused by Coxiella burnetii. Even though Coxiella is not a typical organism, even then it is an intracellular organism, and it is a highly infectious organism. Even one organism can cause disease. The reservoirs are goats, sheep, cattle, and the transmission to humans is through urine, feces, milk, in birth fluids, and inhalation of the organism from contaminated environments. So leptospirosis, you might remember in the spirochete chapter it was given. So leptospira, icterohemorrhagicae, and other species are also there. So this is the most important species, icterohemorrhagica, and there is icterus, that is jaundice, and hemorrhage also. So there is motile, and these are aerobic organisms with hooked ends. You might remember, like both ends are curved, and this is a spirochete. So this is under the dark fluorescent microscopy. So these are bacteria. The patient might be bacteremic for 7 to 10 days, and leptospiruric in the urine also it will be eliminated about 1 week to several months. So leptospira, you might remember, these are bacteria of the genus Leptospira. Rats and other rodents are the most common carriers. They can infect all kinds of wild and domestic animals, and urine of these animals will contaminate the soil and mud, and humans can get infected with contact with urine or other body fluids, water, soil, or food, and then it can be a serious disease like meningitis, respiratory disease, liver failure, kidney damage. All these things can occur due to leptospirosis. So there were different types like hard jaw, canicola, icterohemorrhagica, pomona, etc. So contaminated with leptospires, if urine, the soil, water, tissues, so they can transmit the disease. So you might remember Bartonella also, it caused cat scratch disease, Bartonella henselae, through a bite or scratch of the infected cat. So subsequent lymphadenopathy, after papules are there, lymphadenopathy can be there. So it is transmitted from the cats. Even the rat flea can be involved. So then there is Lyme's disease, which is caused by Borrelia bug dog fairy. It was from the same chapter, that is from spirochete chapter. You might remember this, the black-legged tick, which feeds on infected deer. It picks up the bacterium and bites the human. So this is a hard tick. You can see in the picture. This is a hard tick. And then the human symptoms like rash, arthritis, fever, swollen lymph nodes, neurologic signs, and heart problems can be there in this disease. So there can be different mycotic zoonosis also, like aspergillosis, blastomycosis, cryptococcosis, dermatophytosis, histoplasmosis, porotrichosis. Many of them can be systemic diseases, and some of them are dermatophytosis. They can also be transmitted skin diseases. This can be also transmitted from animals. So you can remember, like birds, like poultry, can be responsible for avian influenza, salmonellosis, campylobacter enteritis, and then the pigeons can be responsible for histoplasmosis, cryptococcosis, psittacosis, candidiasis, salmonellosis, St. Louis encephalitis, and West Nile fever. And then there can be primates, which can be responsible for a huge list of diseases like amoebiasis, campylobacter diarrhea, the diseases caused by Salmonella, Shigella, Helicobacter, yellow fever, falciparum malaria, Knowlesi malaria, monkeypox, hepatitis A, and herpes. So dogs can be responsible for rabies, brucellosis, leptospirosis, giardiasis, babesiosis, leishmaniasis, intestinal worms, blastomycosis, histoplasmosis, and aspergillosis. So cats also can be responsible, like we discussed, cat scratch disease by Bartonella henselae, rabies, or even toxoplasmosis. So thank you for your patient listening. We'll also see a short video right now about zoonotic diseases. So 1 second. So anyone can just unmute and summarize what we discussed in today's class. Yes. Okay. So thank you for joining us today. I hope that you and your